A massive and chilling development has completely upended the ongoing investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, exposing a series of calculated maneuvers and hidden details that have been kept strictly classified until now. In recent days, public discourse has been flooded with speculation surrounding a sequence of mysterious ransom notes, a sudden written apology, and a harrowing timeline suggesting that the elderly matriarch may have lost her life during the initial abduction or very shortly thereafter. The breakthrough came when major media outlets finally authorized the verbatim release of the first ransom communication, uncovering an incredibly specific and deeply disturbing greeting that directly targeted the victim's family. Rather than a generic demand for cash, the document opened with an intimate, terrifyingly direct address, acknowledging the victim by name and explicitly stating that they had taken her directly from her home. This revelation indicates that the perpetrators possessed an unsettling degree of personal knowledge regarding the household dynamics, a variable that investigators and media professionals close to the case had deliberately kept close to the vest for months to protect the integrity of the hunt. The circle of silence surrounding these initial details was remarkably tight, primarily because the digital communications and physical drops were scattered across highly disparate entities, including a national entertainment news conglomerate and 2 independent local broadcasting affiliates operating within the Tucson region. For months, individuals embedded within those distinct media spheres maintained absolute confidentiality, suppressing the exact wording to prevent tipping off the abductors. However, over the past week, the institutional dam broke, prompting a strategic decision to broadcast the chilling contents to the public. Beyond the direct threat, the first document contained an explicit, granular detail that has sent shockwaves through forensic circles. The authors claim precise knowledge of the layout of Nancy's private quarters, specifically naming the exact concealed location where her personal digital tracking device, an Apple Watch, was left to charge on the night of her disappearance. While a wave of analysts initially viewed this as definitive proof of an inside job or meticulous pre-abduction surveillance, seasoned homicide detectives argue that a high percentage of ordinary citizens keep their electronic devices on a bedside nightstand, raising the critical question of whether this was a sophisticated, calculated bluff or true insider intelligence. The underlying mechanics and syntax of the remaining text hold the key to decoding the psychological profile of the abductors, presenting anomalies that highly experienced criminal profilers describe as extraordinarily rare in genuine kidnapping for ransom scenarios. While the first note established a brutal, immediate financial ultimatum, it was a second communication, dispatched days later to an Arizona television network affiliate, that completely shifted the trajectory of the investigation and ignited a fresh wave of forensic scrutiny. This second document completely abandoned the financial demands of the first, steering the entire narrative into an unprecedented realm of remorse and damage control. The exact wording of this second transmission was verified by a prominent investigative reporter who was embedded within the local broadcasting network when the letter arrived. This journalist, who has since transitioned to a high-profile true crime investigative platform, maintained direct first-hand access to the physical document, filtering out the rampant external speculation and verifying the exact linguistic choices made by the perpetrators. The phrasing embedded within this second transmission offers a startling look into the minds of the authors, providing critical clues regarding whether they are the actual physical perpetrators or merely opportunistic proxies trying to exploit a family's nightmare. According to the authenticated text, the writers explicitly stated that they never harbored any intention of causing physical harm to Nancy Guthrie during the execution of their operation. In an even more stunning admission, the authors used highly formalized, archaic language to state that the elderly woman had perished shortly after she was removed from her residence. The specific utilization of the word perished has immediately triggered intense debate among forensic linguists and behavioral analysts, with many pointing out that native English speakers rarely choose such a formal term under extreme stress, suggesting instead that the message may have been composed via a digital translation application or authored by an individual whose primary language is not English. Furthermore, the document claimed that Nancy was buried with nature, a sequence of words that reads as an awkward translated phrase rather than a natural expression. The text then offered a dark, definitive finality, telling the family that absolutely nothing they could have done would have altered the ultimate outcome, concluding the entire message with a formal expression of deep regret This abrupt pivot from ruthless extortionists to remorseful apologetic writers has drawn sharp condemnation from investigators who view the sudden appearance of a conscience as a grotesque, insulting manipulation after dragging an ailing grandmother out of her bed under the cover of absolute darkness. The narrative suggests that the abduction team severely underestimated the profound medical fragility of their target, triggering a catastrophic medical emergency within hours of the breach and forcing the criminal enterprise into an immediate, chaotic panic. The operational escalation of this illicit enterprise becomes glaringly evident when analyzing the raw timeline of these messages, which reveals a frantic 0 to 60 acceleration that completely breaks the standard behavioral patterns of professional extortion syndicates. The initial extortion letter, delivered to a national celebrity media platform roughly 48 hours after the abduction occurred, presented an absolute non-negotiable financial baseline, a demanding payment of $4 million by an immediate, strict deadline. The document explicitly detailed that if this specific window was missed, the baseline would instantly skyrocket to $6 million, punctuated by an uncompromising direct threat of immediate execution. Investigative professionals note that genuine, sophisticated kidnapping networks rarely lead with an outright death threat in their very first overture. The standard operating procedure for tactical financial hostage-taking involves establishing a line of communication, proving the victim is alive, and keeping the family compliant by promising a safe return in exchange for cooperation, only upping the violent ante much later if negotiations stall. This bizarre structural anomaly has led veteran investigators to hypothesize that the first ransom demand was actually composed as a desperate secondary cover-up after the operational team realized their high-value hostage had already suffered a fatal medical event. The public record shows that during the initial, chaotic press briefings immediately following the home invasion, regional law enforcement leadership stepped up to the podium and issued a stark public warning, explicitly stating that Nancy Guthrie suffered from severe advanced medical conditions and absolutely required her specialized prescription medications within 24 hours to survive. It is a known reality in high-profile abductions that perpetrators consume media coverage ravenously, hanging on every word broadcast from the official podium. Hearing that their captive was on the brink of death, or having already witnessed her collapse in the back of their getaway vehicle, the suspects likely panicked, realizing they were suddenly sitting on a homicide charge rather than a highly lucrative payout. The chaos deepened when the media platform that received the initial $4 million demand became the target of a completely separate, predatory wave of communications. This second series of messages did not originate from the original sender's digital signature, but rather from an opportunistic, unidentified third party claiming to possess concrete insider knowledge regarding the identities of the perpetrators and the exact coordinates where Nancy's remains were deposited. This individual began a persistent mercenary dialogue with media executives attempting to barter this vital intelligence for a massive cash payout. Most notably, this shadow informant echoed the precise translated imagery of the second official note, independently asserting that the victim had been buried deep in the wilderness. This aligns closely with a tragic parallel development just south of the border, where an international volunteer coalition that specializes in locating missing persons in dangerous territories acted on a highly specific anonymous tip in the Sonora province near Nogales. The tip claimed Nancy was resting in a makeshift grave situated directly over an active wilderness stream. Although that initial tactical search did not locate the victim, the operation was deemed highly credible, drawing significant security infrastructure and armed escorts from Mexican federal authorities who recognized the severe geopolitical implications of the drop site. As federal agencies embedded themselves within the media networks to trace these digital footprints, a striking linguistic profile began to emerge. Advanced behavioral analysis conducted on this mercenary second round of letters led federal investigators to formally theorize that the individual attempting to sell the location of the body is likely a woman. This assessment, based entirely on specialized syntax patterns, gender-specific linguistic markers, and the unique structural formatting of the written extortion, introduces a sickening twist to the narrative, the possibility of a female accomplice deliberately twisting the psychological knife into a grieving family for pure financial gain. This individual may have been brought into the conspiracy to act as a custodian, tasked with keeping the elderly hostage stabilized in a safe house while the primary operatives managed the tactical logistics. Simultaneously, whispers from former federal intelligence assets suggest that field offices are closing in on a definitive identification of the haunting, masked figure captured on Nancy's front porch doorbell camera on the night of the breach. This shadowy entity, who stepped out of the midnight darkness to execute the physical breach, has been the primary focal point of global outrage. However, veteran homicide investigators are urging severe caution regarding claims of an imminent arrest, viewing it as a massive, unrealistic leap forward in a case that has remained completely stagnant for nearly 5 months. To accurately dissect the structural reality of where this investigation stands, one must look at the hard numbers. As of late June, Nancy Guthrie has been missing for exactly 144 days. For an investigation of this global magnitude to pass the 5-month mark without a single confirmed suspect in custody, a validated forensic vehicle track, or a definitive recovery of the victim points to a profound systemic breakdown between the local, state, and federal agencies tasked with running the grid. To truly understand how this tactical breakdown occurred, an independent forensic team recently traveled directly to the heart of Tucson to physically survey the topography surrounding the primary scene. The operational vulnerabilities embedded within this case become immediately apparent when shifting focus from high-level federal data aggregation back down to raw street-level reality. A critical structural disconnect exists within the local multi-agency framework running the task force. Specifically, regional homicide detectives have completely failed to coordinate with municipal street crimes units, colloquially known in the Southwest border corridors as Bravo teams. These frontline field officers possess direct daily intelligence on low-level criminal networks, transient encampments, and street-level drug distributors operating within the high-crime sectors of the city. In high-profile abductions, real-time resolution is rarely achieved through static digital forensics alone. It relies on investigators physically hitting the pavement, leveraging active informants, and executing proactive pressure points within known illicit hubs to break open local chatter. The logistical map of the abduction route introduces a secondary, highly sophisticated geographical variable. The residential grid lines of the Catalina Foothills neighborhood do not conform to a traditional, easily navigable urban layout. Instead, the roadways mirror a chaotic, twisting bowl of spaghetti filled with dead ends, blind ridges, and complex elevation changes that require intimate, pre-existing familiarity to navigate under the cover of total darkness. It is highly improbable that an opportunistic, out-of-town burglar or random predator could seamlessly navigate this labyrinth at 2 o'clock in the morning, execute a silent breach, and vanish without leaving a vehicular trace. This geographic reality strongly indicates that the primary operative spent a significant amount of time physically studying the neighborhood layout or possessed an insider map of the target perimeter. When applying standard behavioral analysis to the physical breach site, a clear picture emerges regarding the division of labor within the criminal enterprise. Experienced investigators frequently utilize the classical procedural metaphor of the chef and the waiter to dissect multi-perpetrator home invasions. In this analytical framework, the masked figure captured by the porch security camera represents the waiter, the physical asset tasked with delivering the threat, managing the tactical breach, and executing the high-risk extraction. However, the true architect of the crime is the chef, an insulated, sophisticated planner who remains entirely behind the scenes, monitoring the emergency frequencies, managing the encrypted digital cryptocurrency wallets, and drafting the highly structured ransom text. The raw physical violence documented on the front porch, where blood spatter confirmed a significant physical struggle, proves that the frontline asset lacked even a baseline of empathy, operating purely as the muscle of the syndicate. This rigid separation of criminal roles often creates a severe operational fault line, the exact moment a high-stakes operation deviates from the script. When Nancy Guthrie suffered an immediate fatal medical crisis inside the getaway vehicle, the division of labor collapsed into structural panic. The secondary assets, tasked with securing a live hostage for long-term confinement, suddenly found themselves facing a capital murder charge. This monumental shift in legal jeopardy explains the bizarre, contradictory nature of the subsequent written communications. The remorseful tone of the second document was not an expression of organic human empathy, but rather a calculated, legally minded effort by one of the secondary co-conspirators to immediately mitigate their future judicial exposure. by creating a written record stating that the death was an unintended accident and expressing formal contrition. The author was actively building a defense framework for their eventual capture, attempting to separate their institutional involvement from the brutal physical actions of the primary porch operative. The multi-agency grid has recently focused heavily on a highly specific procedural phenomenon known within cybersecurity and street-level asset protection as a physical wrench attack. This tactical vector involves a criminal entity utilizing direct physical violence, home invasions, or high-stakes abductions against an individual to forcibly compel the extraction of decentralized digital wealth or cryptocurrency. Emerging investigative theories suggest that Nancy Guthrie may have been targeted not as the primary financial holder, but as a high-value proxy target designed to exert maximum psychological leverage over her high-profile family members. By taking an extraordinarily vulnerable individual who resided completely alone behind a sprawling, heavily vegetated perimeter, the planners behind this conspiracy sought to create an absolute crisis where the family would immediately submit to their multi-million-dollar demands. This conceptual framework perfectly recontextualizes the rapid deployment of the initial $4 million demand, which specifically mandated payment through highly complex, anonymized digital channels rather than traditional cash drops. This specific operational strategy heavily relies on the assumption that a family facing the sudden, terrifying extraction of an elderly relative will immediately bypass traditional banking compliance protocols to execute rapid, irreversible blockchain transfers. The behavioral mechanics of this operation began to unravel when the local administrative leadership took the unprecedented step of publicly minimizing community risk during the crucial first 48 hours of the investigation, by explicitly stating that the regional populace had zero reason to fear a systemic threat. Administrative directors inadvertently projected an institutional certainty that the crime was highly targeted. Veteran investigators have sharply criticized this messaging choice, noting that broadcasting a definitive local-only threat model directly to the media effectively tipped off the abductors that the police were operating under a closed, domestic-centric theory. This administrative declaration created an artificial buffer zone for the perpetrators, signaling that law enforcement had not yet initiated massive citywide street checkpoints or deployed regional Bravo teams to lock down the local transportation corridors. The tactical fallout of this systemic delay became painfully visible when contrasted against the aggressive precision actions deployed in recent high-profile domestic multi-homicide investigations. In those parallel baseline operations, federal assets and localized task forces immediately initiated aggressive street-level canvassing, leveraging hundreds of rapid response field agents to exhaustively shake down known criminal informants within the first week. In the Guthrie matter, however, the primary operational grid remained frozen in a purely analytical posture, heavily prioritizing passive back-end data gathering, cell tower triangulation, and historical digital forensic dumps, while completely neglecting active street enforcement. This structural hesitation allowed the primary getaway vehicle and the physical porch operative to seamlessly slip past the immediate perimeter, securing a 5-month head start that has left the multi-agency task force chasing cold digital leads while the physical trail grew completely frozen on the pavement. The profound psychological warfare embedded within this operation reached a critical climax when the family, in a united front of profound grief, descended down their long residential driveway to place a physical token of remembrance at a makeshift roadside memorial. From a behavioral profiling perspective, this specific moment created an intense post-incident analytical trigger for the perpetrators watching the national broadcast. If the second Ransom document, which claimed that Nancy had already passed away, was an absolute fabrication designed to stop the family from seeking proof of life, the sight of her children standing in public unity would have forced the abductors to realize their psychological leverage was fracturing. Conversely, if the message of her passing was entirely accurate, the perpetrators would have viewed this public display of enduring hope as a severe disconnect, potentially provoking them into executing highly dangerous secondary post-incident behaviors to reestablish control over the narrative. This complex, high-stakes dynamic hints at a massive, covert double-track strategy being executed behind the scenes by federal behavioral analysts, who deliberately utilize public media events to manipulate the anxiety levels of the fugitives, while the true tactical track quietly eliminates safe houses across the southwest border.